Добрый вечер. Today we start at 6:10, so it's a couple of minutes, maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll be starting. Well, it's 6:10. Now the time has changed for our lectures. I hope that everybody knows that. I can guess from the fact that you are here that you must know. Well, last time we discussed general approaches, general rules for financial modeling, and I introduced a project for which I will be going to develop my model. And as I said, by today, I expect that you have chosen your own projects to develop your models. And please fill the form. I'll send you a link. Fill the form with your names and your projects so that I could navigate through all the list of your projects and manage this. This link is also available in the folder that I created for you. I uploaded to this folder, I uploaded my first presentation from the first lecture. And now there's a file there called link.txt, just with this link. And please, you created Google Doc. Okay, so you send me a link then, because I don't have your link. Okay, if so, then just fill this file. I expect that you all have access to this file. Well, 1 second, I'll check it. Okay. I see 13 people here. Okay, and I expect that all else will join later. Well, good. How do we choose a project with balance sheet statements? If project don't have these statements, I don't understand. Yeah, that's very simple. You will build those statements. The only thing you need from the project is the idea of what this project is. Like in my example, I'll show you again the example from, actually I'll skip it. You will see all the assumptions in my project today when we'll be discussing those assumptions. So the idea is that you should choose what you will do in this project, and everything else will build this model with all financial reports, etc. So you need not a balance sheet from any project. No, you don't need past financial statements. We start our projects from scratch, from greenfield, because if you model something, if you model a business with historical performance, and you, in this case, you usually use these historical financial reports to forecast its future performance, it's just a different case. This is something that you saw, I'm not sure, probably some of you were on my valuation course. In this valuation course, we created a model based on historical financial statements. This is not the case now. Today, we think about projects from scratch, from greenfield, when we create something, some new business, new company, and so on. Okay, so please, all who haven't filled anything in your Google spreadsheet, please choose the project and fill it. And now,
sorry, one question.
Yes.
So brownfield are not accepted. Let's say I want to switch a complex of, I don't know, it was a warehouse and I want to build a office. Can I do that?
Yes, you can actually do a brownfield project. The only thing is that your model, your analysis will not be based on historical financial reports. We start from our assumptions about the future, and we model the whole business from those assumptions. If you have a brownfield project, then you can actually boil it down to just current assets, maybe current debt, and add those assets and debt to your model as the beginning value. So in principle, brownfield projects will be absolutely okay for us too. Maybe if you don't have experience in modeling, then maybe brownfield projects will unnecessarily complicate the modeling process for you. So that's why I would prefer for your projects something greenfield, something started from zero. But if you feel comfortable with your project, it's okay. go with this brownfield project. This will just a bit complicate your model. And as the most important part of our course goes in our one-to-one interactions with your models, of course, you can take a project that's more complex than minimum necessary level and ask all the questions you have about this model. So the only thing is that that must be a project based on your assumptions about the future, and we will build all financial reports, analysis, and etc. Based on those assumptions, not based on historical financial reports. That's it. Okay. So as a beginning for today's lecture, I'm going to tell you some secret about our lectures. I don't know, maybe people from the university told you about that, but during the lectures, I'll be discussing my version of my model for my project, and I will try to do it in some unique way. But in fact, a year ago, I did it once for Coursera. So actually, if you missed something, if you want to see something again, you can go to Coursera, find a course, Financial Modeling. It's under Higher School of Economics name, and you will find another copy of all my lectures there. For Coursera, I was building all the models while I explaining that. This time, I will not do it. I will use chunks of code, chunks of models, and I will be discussing those models, and I'll be explaining you why I do this or that, and you can ask your questions. But you have another copy. It's as far as I know, it is free. So this course, so you can attend that course too, just as another copy. Well, so today we're going to discuss the assumptions in our project and how we build. One second. How we build those assumptions in the model. So the first step for any model, let's start from empty sheet. The first step for any model is to build an infrastructure for your model within Excel. What's that? First, we choose our columns. The first one will be for names. Second will be probably for constants, like if we have a number that's the same for any period in the project, then we can probably put this number in this column instead of periods. So it will be, I'll give them names, although in the model, I usually don't do this. Constants. We always have a column for units because, as we discussed last time, every line in our financial model should have information about the units of measure so that anybody could see those units. And you shouldn't avoid repeating those units, even if the whole model is in rubles, for example, or in thousands of rubles. It's okay to repeat your units as many times as the number of lines you have. Now, after the units, we're going to start our periods. I'll just number them now. But before those periods, we always need a small, narrow column. Why? Because we need it for technical reasons. Sometimes we use it for formula to have something to refer as a previous state, previous period. And sometimes we use it for special flags. You'll see that. Okay, we do something like this. Then we set widths for all our columns and so on. And later, we will actually create all new sheets in this model, not by the new sheet button, but instead we will create a copy of this first sheet so that any worksheet in the model would be the same. It looks like something not important, but actually it's very important to have all the model in one style so that you can easily go through the model and see what's where in this model. Okay, so we create something like this, and this model will have some titles for the periods. Now let's go back to the model I prepared for today's lesson, and let's look what is the titles, how we create those titles. Well, for the titles, we usually have in the model, sometimes people split this worksheet to a technical one and macro worksheet. But this is just my preference. I personally don't like too many sheets in the model. That's why I combine different sheets into one. It's up to you. You can choose my style or any other style. So on macro sheet, I usually place all technical flags and actual macro information. So for any model, we need first 2 lines, planning step, usually in months. So how many months in this period? And the period number. Period number is just 1, 2, 3, and so on. For planning step, it would be convenient to make the first period, mark it as an input data. And all the others could be a link to this planning step that we put here as a constant. And now you can see some technical things we start adding to the model. First, if I have something in my model that I'm going to change manually, so any input data, I mark it in cell styles as input cell. And I prefer to always create custom styles. And this is another thing. You should never do something like this. I marked it by changing color, or I marked it by changing color of, for example, the numbers. Why? Because later with this model, there can be a situation where you will have to change the look of your model, something like changing colors or something like this. And with the style, I can just change it here, just like with any word style or whatever. And it will be changed in the whole model. If you made it manually for each cell, it would be just impossible to redraw everything in the model. And as I said, visual appearance of the model is important. So it's actually quite a possible thing that somebody will ask you to change how your model looks like. Okay, so the first thing we created a style. In this style, I usually, you can choose what will be applied with this style. I usually apply just fill, because I prefer to mark input cells not with the color of their numbers, but with the fill. Why? Because in some cases, it would be convenient to do something like this. For example, I removed the data. Instead of putting zeros, I just removed some data. Here, I still can see that these are my input cells. If I used the color for font, it would become just invisible. So it's a bit inconvenient to use color for the font. But this is another style. This is another possible approach. You can do that. Another thing that you can set in this cell style is protection. With no protection, what we have, if I protect the whole sheet, then I cannot change anything in this sheet except these cells. And again, it's convenient if you have one style for all input cells, you can mark them as input data. And later, if you give this model to somebody not that reliable as an editor, you can lock the model so that just the cells that you offer for editing could be changed. Okay. Next thing, why we need this period planning step, period length? Because if we plan, for example, by quarters, it's 3 as well. If we plan by quarters, then the length of period is 3 months, and we should take this into account in all calculations of interest or discounting, in things like that. Sometimes we need it for financial ratios. For example, if I calculate something like return on equity. Return on equity is net profit over equity. But in this financial ratio, we expect that the net profit is annual net profit. So for this model, we would have to change the formula so that we multiply, for example, our net profit by 4, or do something else to work with something closer to annual profit than this quarterly profit. Well, so we have period step, period length for our formulas. We have period number. Sometimes we use period number in some formulas. And another thing why we need this period number is we actually will add a line here. It's very convenient to have period number here, because when you switch between various when you switch between various sheets, it always happens that you switch to another sheet, especially when you have many periods, but on this another sheet you have something like this. Some periods are scrolled and you just don't see that you are not in the first period. So when you write a formula, it's very easy to make an error by linking to incorrect period, because when you switch to this model, something like this, you would like to add a link to the first period of something. You go here, you link it, but it's not the first period. It's 2026. And we don't actually remember. 1 second. We don't remember the years when we work with the model. We don't think about which year is the correct one for the first period. So it's better to have another line here. And with this line, you will always see, I'll close this. With this line, you'll always see that you are in the first period here, and we'll have to repeat it here. The same principle. That's why you shouldn't build any worksheet from the beginning, from the very beginning, and copy it instead. You will just save time for things like that. Was it was 9 here? Yes, it's 9 here. Every single key. And by the way, because 1 second, because we changed something in the model, we have it like jumping between sheets, and that's another reason why you better to create all sheets by copying, so that each width of which column would be the same. But okay, we need it. Another thing we can do in this model, I prepared the model so that that could be a model by years or by quarters. For this project, I used it by years, but if I later, if I work with another project, I can just take this model, remove all the data, and use a lot of things from this model, reuse it again for another project. So I added a field where I choose, is it for 3 months step or for 12 months step. If in any input field I have a list of several possible values, then I can do the following. I can go to data. Here, there's a button called data validation. And in this data validation button, I can choose that the type of this field is list. And as a source of data, I can just put all available data. This will validate information I put here, and I can't set it to 4 months and so on. It can be just 12 or 3 months. But as an additional result, when I do it like this, I can use it as a drop-down menu. And that's much better than doing things like, I don't know, adding Excel controls, or sorry, Excel controls and things like that. We could do something like this by combo box, but you shouldn't use combo box and all other controls from this menu. You should avoid them. They make all models a bit clumsy. Sometimes they not very stable, so you should just avoid this approach. Then we will have to add 2 lines, beginning date and end date. Beginning date for the first period is just the date we entered here. Then we can use edate formula. Edate formula function edate adds some number of months. So here we have the first date, the first parameter is the date, and then some number of months. For example, the end of this period is the beginning of this period plus some months. But if we just added 6 months, we get not the last day of the last month of our period, but we get the first day of the next period, right? So we add here -1 to get actually the last day of our period. And the next period then is equal just to previous date +1, and all the formulas repeat. The period titles. Actually, for your model, you can just type your period titles because you do it once. If you need a formula like this, it can add unnecessary errors to your calculation. But if you want to add period titles, automatic period titles, then you can do it this way. For example, if it's if the period is 12 months, then we just take year from the date. If not, then we use the month's number, the first month's number, the last month's number, and the year, and that will create a title like this. You can build another formula, for example, for the number of quarter, like first quarter, second, third, fourth quarter. I use this one just because it's the simplest version of these title generating formulas. Okay, so we created this technical part, and what I do next, I copied it to my title. I copied it to my title, then I put my selection here, and using freeze panes, I can unfreeze it, and now I can freeze those panes. With this selection, by freeze panes, we freeze all lines above the selection and all columns to the left of the selection. Okay, now we have the structure. Then we create our first title. And in this first title, we just repeat again the titles by linking to this calculated titles. Now, all the more, this is how we do anything in our model. We split the model into blocks of information. We make those blocks visually separated from each other. And each block should be a complete piece of information for something described in this block. And by the way, in these things, I actually go in conflict with some requirements often appearing in requirements for financial models. I'll discuss that later. Okay, what we need to do to know about macroeconomic information. First of all, it's inflation. And for inflation, we need, and currency. I just used one cell as information about my currency. And in the whole model, when I use rubles, I will use the link to this cell. And to make it simpler to link to this cell, I gave this cell a name. The simplest way to make your cell a named cell instead of something like C12 is just to put selection here and type a name. But you can also do it in a more complex way. You can open formulas, name manager, and create a new name here. When you create a new name here, you can, in addition, you can choose scope for this name. Why you need this scope? Sometimes you have a worksheet where you use names, but you need several worksheets like this within one model, within one file. If you try to create a sheet like this and use it in formulas that Excel wouldn't know, if you have, for example, if you have a currency, main currency cell, and you have another worksheet, and you try and name another cell with the same name, main currency, thinking about that this main currency is the main currency for this worksheet. How would Excel know when from another worksheet you link to this main currency? How Excel would know that it should use this cell or that cell? It's impossible. So that's why in Excel from 2010, from 2010, you could create names for cells, either for the whole workbook or just for this sheet. But I wouldn't recommend that because anyway, it makes your workbook, your model less transparent, less understandable. It's harder to work with such a complicated naming principles. So if you can avoid these sheet level names, and actually avoid names at all. I added just one name in my model just to show you how it works. Okay, so we have a name of our currency, and now we need inflation. For my model, I use, this is just study model. For my model, I use just one inflation index, just general inflation. But in real projects, you can build as many inflations or indexes as you need. And sometimes, for example, your sales price have one inflation, your costs have another inflation, and so on and so on and so on. So we start for any inflation. We start with annual values for this inflation, and then I usually calculate in any case, even before I think about how I will use this inflation in the model, I calculate two price indexes. The first is to the previous period. That is how much prices would grow as compared to the previous period. And the second is to the beginning of the project. You can see that these numbers are the same because the inflation is the same, and these numbers are accumulated. Depending on how I build my input data for prices or for costs or for revenue, I will sometimes better use price index to the previous period, and sometimes it's better to use price index to the beginning of the project. So I build them all for all inflation indexes I use. In addition, sometimes it's convenient to have one second, no question. Why F15 is not? What do you think?
Maybe because there is only half of year.
Yes, because in F we have prices just for half year, because our formula, look at this. Our formula here is that inflation index is equal to what we had before times inflation, annual inflation in the power of period length over 12. So for 6 months, that gives us just square root. Okay, that's why. And look, sometimes this is very important thing. What do you think? For the first period, should the inflation index be 1? Is inflation for the first period is 1, or maybe I'm wrong and I should put this formula here, and in this period we should have inflation like plus 2%. Why it's 1? And what do we think about our model if we put 1 here? What does it mean for the model? This is a very important thing. Well, look, if it's 1 here, no, it's not simply a simplification. It's something else. If it's 1 here, then we believe that all cash flows for this period, they are like happen in the first day of this period. That's why no price has changed, because we calculated everything just as if all cash flows of the first period, and actually of any other period, all the cash flows of this period, for example, they are like in the first on the 1st January of 2024. Why is this that important? Because when we gather information for our project, in many cases, actually for any more or less serious project that will happen, we gather this information from various different sources. And that means that sometimes you get information about your sales, your prices for sales from one source, your data from about costs from another source, your capital expenditure from the third one, and so on. And it's very important to ask yourself always, for what period this data, these prices are actual. Because imagine a business with normal profitability of this business equal to, net profit margin for sales or a return on sales. So normal profitability for the business is 8%. And now you make a mistake. You take your sales price from one source of information, and that was from, for example, from your forecast, and that's for 2022. And then you take your cost information, and it's not from expected data about 2022. Instead, you use current prices for 2021. What happens? Your sales price is inflated by 1 year, and your costs didn't have this inflation for 1 year. Instead of 8% return on sales, we get 12% because sales up by 4% and your costs are still the same. It looks like the inflation was just 4%, so it doesn't mean so much. But in fact, we exaggerated our free cash flow by 50%. We expected that our EBITDA or things like that, EBITDA net profit would be 8% of net profit would be 8%. Instead, we got 12%. And project calculated with data like this, of course, will be incorrect. Well, so but by the way, because of this, you should be very careful with different inflation indexes for different items in your project, because in the beginning it can look like about the same, but you set different inflation rates, and somewhere closer to the end of the project, you have absolutely incorrect profitability for this project, but you don't see that because we have too many numbers in the model, and people tend to use just some first periods and expect that everything stays the same in the next periods. So that's why we have 2% instead of 4% here, and that's why we have 1 here. You could calculate the same model using 2% inflation here. If you use 2% inflation here, it means that you sort of expect that all the cash flows would be at the end of this period. It's less convenient for investment projects because for a project, the first cash outflow is actually the beginning of the project. So we know for sure that some huge cash payments, because we usually start with the investment, and this investment is much bigger than the sales or cash flows of the first or the second period, and so on. So the first huge cash flow will happen in the beginning of the first period. And we shouldn't underestimate the importance of these first payments. We shouldn't discount it. And that's why we will have discounted index 1 for the first period. And just the same way, we will have this index for inflation and so on. So that's why it's 1 here. That's why this inflation index uses the inflation rate not from the 2023 period, but from the previous period, because that's where all the prices were inflating. Okay, and that's it with the inflation. So now we have this module with all necessary indexes. Tax parameters, it's simple. We just copy the title, change the name of this table, and put all taxes information here. And with taxes, you can see that we actually have a choice. We can set some parameters if we believe that this parameter is a constant for the project. We can input it in our constants column, but we can also just repeat this parameter many times in all columns. In this case, we mark them as input data, but just the first cells actually edited manually, and all the others are just linked to the previous cell. Sometimes you can do it this way instead of using input style. You can edit it like this, but I don't do that. I do things like that only in very complex models, where it's very important to minimize the number of cells opened for changes. In simpler models like this way is better if we believe that something like, for example, corporate tax will change later. If we, for example, start with some I don't know, subsidized tax rate, and then we go to a normal tax rate later, we can just change the numbers and use those updated taxes. Okay, this is our macro. And now we create a copy of this sheet, and we go to the main part of our model, to the main part of the project. This main part is our assumptions. I usually call it project worksheet. I avoid assumptions term because of one problem. We actually have a choice. We have a choice, and it's not a very easy choice. Sometimes in the models, as I told you before, that we have some conflict with requirements. So sometimes in the models, banks or investors require that all input data should be separated from all calculations. And that means that if we have some products like product 1, product 6, and we have sales for those products. Let's show it how it could be. Then first, we should input all the information about those sales, and then somewhere on another worksheet, we will calculate all the sales for those products, and so on for most data in the model. And yes, that helps to work with models. Sometimes it's very convenient. Main currency, yes. Sometimes it's very convenient, but what if, for example, for sales, we don't have sales for each product in rubles as input data? Instead, first, we have manufacturing capacity. Then we have capacity utilization, and by the capacity and capacity utilization, we calculate sales volume. Then we have a price, and by the price and sales volume, we get actually revenue for each product. That means that for the list like this, we would have to create first list for capacity, then for capacity utilization. Yes, we could do that in one line. We could do something like this. That would be for our capacity. That would be for our capacity utilization. Then we repeat this model, and we don't need it here. And here we put something like prices. This is in percent, yes. This is in rubles. Something like this. And then we calculate sales for all products and so on. And what if different products have different principle for our calculations? And what if we made a mistake? We type in some numbers here. It's very, and what if we want to add a product to this list? All those things will take a lot of time and effort to do them. So instead of this style, I will show you another possible style, although not people like this style. So with our sales module, I will show you the most complex version of a module in the file in our model. In this case, our sales depend on first capacity, then capacity utilization. That gives us sales in units, then price. And another thing you should always remember about numbers in your model. Always think about all prices. Are they with value added tax or without value added tax? And put this description in the names of all your lines. Like here, price net of VAT, sales revenue net of VAT. Then we add VAT and we calculate the numbers for VAT. And now revenue including VAT. So you explain here all the lines. Here I prepared this revenue including VAT because I'm going to show you how to build a direct version of cash flow statement in this model. In Coursera, by the way, I don't use VAT at all. Instead, I build indirect version of cash flow and avoid discussing VAT. But here we will be discussing VAT. Now, for each product, I build a block like that, and calculations within the block, they are very simple, I believe, right? To calculate sales, we just link capacity to capacity utilization, but there's one trick here. Look at this formula. My capacity utilization is just the link to the line of capacity utilization, but my sales, my capacity, total capacity, is a link to a constant. So to make it possible to distribute this formula to all periods without errors, I will have to, because this link should be stable, it should be constant, I will have to add this anchor $sign. And usually I use something like F4 key to add automatically add those anchors, but not in this case, because yes, I need an anchor before the letter so that the column won't change, but I will remove anchor. I will not use anchor before the number, before the row number, because I want to create a formula so that if I copy this block and paste it again here, all the formulas would work, but now with the new copy. And this is the way I actually sorry, I actually build my model. I create one block for one product, and in the project I can have, I don't know, 10 different products, and I just copy those products as many times as I need for all my products in the project. And that can be a real problem building this list of products, because it just takes a lot of time. Here we have just 3 or 4 products, but sometimes, especially for things like raw materials, you can get a lot of items in the project, and it takes a lot of time to build them. So it's very convenient to write formulas so that you can copy and paste your blocks of information to create as many products or items as you need in the project. So this is just this simple formula. Then our price starts with the beginning price, and then we just use our inflation index from macro sheet. And look here, I link to the line 15, and line 15 is price index to the previous period. With price index of the previous period, what I can do, sometimes it happens a lot actually. Sometimes I know prices for some years or some periods. Something like, I know that the price here will be this, and I'm going to set these first 3 periods as input data, because I know that in this year I have a detailed forecast, it will be like this, and then I understand that something expected to change on the market, and the prices will go down, and so on. This and so on is implemented by the fact that our inflation index is always based on the previous period. That's why we need this inflation based on the previous period. And so we can build these calculations, and we can change our forecast very quickly. Now, sales revenue. This is a very simple thing, just sales in units times price. VAT is just our VAT rate times sales revenue net of VAT. We repeat this VAT rate here. It's, by the way, it's a link to our macro VAT here. We repeat it because in some cases you have projects or products within your project without VAT. So and that can be important for your tax calculations. Okay, and now revenue including VAT, of course, just sales without VAT plus VAT. So this is how we created one item in our model. Now, if we have 4 items like here, I put all my sales in this type of segment, but if I had more detailed information, I could distribute this capacity to these 4 products and calculate sales for all 4 of them. Now, the last step, I need in any module, in any block of information, I should calculate subtotals. So I should calculate all the lines that I will be using later in the model down there in other tables or in financial reports. A very important rule for financial reports: all your formulas in the financial reports will consist just of one link. So if we have a revenue line in the income statement, and when we'll create the income statement, then the formula in the income statement should be just one link equal to something. No calculations should be made within financial reports. It's very important because if you do those calculations in financial reports, it's very hard to track your calculations and understand where it all happens. Here, it's very simple. I understand within such structure, I understand that all calculations, everything, all the data used to calculate sales, they all are in this table, in this module. And if I have a question about sales, I should look for the answer in this table. So now we should somehow calculate total sales. For example, total revenue that should appear in the income statement. A simple approach is just to sum up all revenues from our products. It's 1 plus second plus third and the last one. But this is a problem, because first I had to go through all the table, and what if I had here not 4 products but like 20 products, 20 products with more details for each product. We have now a couple of clients for which we build their models for their strategy. And in this strategy, they have one client had like 80 products, 80, because they have just a set of ideas. They would like to choose what products they will launch, what not, where to invest, where not to invest, and so on. So those 80 products, they are all important for them. They want to model them separately, and in the model we have 80 products. Of course, for models like this, sales would be on a separate sheet. So with 80 products, we would have a formula here with 80 elements. It's impossible to work with formula like that. I would prefer something like a sum, right? That would be a very simple formula. Unfortunately, I cannot sum up any range in my model, because for each product I had lines that I need to add, and all other lines with other type of information. So we do this way first, and now we use our technical column. First, we put flags here. It can be like 1, 2, 3, or it can be something like, I don't know, sales, VAT, and revenue. It can be a letter or number. It doesn't matter. Now, in the end of our block of information, we create our total lines: revenue in the income statement, VAT accrued, and sales in the cash flow statement, including VAT. We know that this revenue should be a sum of all lines with 1 in technical column. So we put 1 here, 2 here, 3 here. And now we create such formula. Sum if the first parameter here, where should we check for our flags? And that's our D column, technical column. And we fix this column by putting anchors before the letter. Next question: what is the criteria? The criteria is these columns should have the same flag as in our, these lines should have the same flag as in our line 1 for this column. And the last parameter, what should we sum? And we should sum all information from the same period. Now we don't have any anchors here. And you can see that as the period, we chose the whole table above those totals. What it gives us? It gives us a very convenient opportunity. If later I decided to add one more product, I'll just copy it, paste. And if I have something about this product, it's added automatically. So my formula, it looks like more I don't know, sophisticated than just direct summing, but its formula will adjust itself automatically. If I add products, it will not crash. If I remove products, and so on. So I created a flexible block of information, and I can use this block of information for as many products as I need. And in the end of my table, I created all the data that will go to other tables, to financial reports, whatever. And in addition, here I created a couple of other lines like operating stage flag and capacity utilization ratio. These are useful for next blocks in our model for things like raw materials or operating expenses, because if we don't have sales, that usually means that we haven't started our production yet. We have investment stage. On the investment stage, we don't pay operating expenses. We just have capital expenditure. And that's what we should use in our operating expenses model later. Okay, so this is how we create our sales forecast. Next module. And the modules you have in your model for your project would be for 99% cases the same as in this project, although you maybe will use different style for modeling a product. Maybe you have another way of describing this product. Maybe you don't need capacity and capacity utilization. Instead, you can just put your unit sales. Or maybe you have a more complex pricing principle and you would like to model it here, and so on. So for any product you have, you can build this block in your style, but the general principle would be the same. You develop one piece of information, one product, one item, then you copy it as many times you need, and you create subtotals here based on things like sum if. Although you actually you have other possible styles, I will show you them. Well, raw materials. For raw materials and for generally for cost, for all our expenses, we have two types of expenses. First is variable expenses. Variable expenses change linearly when you change something in your sales. If later for some sensitivity analysis or for another scenario, you change something in sales volume, then your variable expenses changes the same way. Here I call it raw materials and components. Actually, for many projects, your variable expenses are not just raw materials. For example, energy. And energy can be variable expenses as well. And you have choice here. You can split your expenses into two parts, variable expenses and operating expenses, fixed expenses. Or you can call one table raw materials and components. And then you should understand that some variable expenses are still out of your raw materials table. So they are not here, but they're variable. You should link them to the sales volume. Why we do that? Because look here, imagine that for cement, we need just two variable costs. First is clay, and second is energy. They are all variable, but what is the difference between them? Important difference. Any idea? What's the difference between clay and electricity, for example? Or iron ore? For these items, you can, and actually in many cases must and will, create inventory. So you have stock of your raw materials, but you won't have stock for electricity. And because investments in working capital can be huge, it's very important to understand what is your inventory, what is your working capital, and what will not be your inventory and working capital. So that's why sometimes variable expenses go to another table. We have a choice. Actually, we can have three tables: raw materials, other variable expenses, and fixed costs. But here I build just two tables. So some variable expenses in my model will be in the next table. For raw materials, generally we have a very simple rule. We need use per ton or per something. So for cement, for 1 ton of cement, we have 135 tons of limestone, for example, and from that we calculate, knowing how much cement we sell, we calculate our direct costs, first in tons, then by using price, we get cost in rubles, net of VAT, because the price is net of VAT. Then we accrue VAT and calculate cost including VAT. And look, by the way, do you think there's an error here? What would happen to this model if I decide later, 2 months ago or 3 months ago, if I decide that I should that I should change this product mix, and instead of just bulk cement here, I will sell it. I have the same names, for example, bulk as well, but M500, and I have something like 500,000 tons here and here. Will my model be correct? No. Why? Because I simplified it too much. I used direct link to an item. I linked it to this item. Although I understand that I need the same limestone for all types of cement, and actually the amount of limestone is the same, I mean amount per ton of cement. So the correct way of building this relationship would be create here something like total unit sales. Total sales. Put it like, let's make it code 4. Then I use the same code here and so on. And with this line, if something changed in my product mix and so on, all calculations here would be correct. I simplified my model, and although it helped me to build this model quicker, later in my work with the model, I can catch a problem, because it's first of all, the formula isn't correct. I have hanging products products without any cost, and if this new product would be not like 500,000 tons, for 500,000 I will see probably, but if I add something like 50, and here it will be like this, right? Then this number isn't that big. I will not see that 50,000 tons just disappeared from my raw materials. So first, this is dangerous practice. And the second, even if I see that I have to change something in my formula, that makes it harder to change the product mix, to change anything. So it's just not a very correct approach. But in all the other things, I use the same approach here. I build a block of information. I put flags to all lines that I would like to collect at the end of my module. And in the end, I created those subtotals with the same codes and collected information from this block by SUMIF. Okay. So that was one possible style of building these blocks of building assumptions. And now we will see another possible style, another way of building a model. Here, the next block is our general expenses, operating expenses that fixed, right? And for those expenses, we have a lot of lines. a lot of items, but what simplifies the task for us is that actually for all those lines, information, the structure of those lines isn't unique. For each line, we have the same block of information, just expected payment for this item, like something, I don't know, routine repair of equipment. We expect that it will take like 13 million per year, and this price is today's price. So of course it's not 13 million. In each year it's different, but the principle is the same. This number is the only thing we know about each line. So when we have many similar items, we can change the style. So instead of building a detailed item for each detailed block for each item in our costs, we first list all those costs. We put the price, the cost per period. Then we calculate total cost for this block, and you can see that we actually collected several different blocks of expenses. So we calculated total. They all were net of VAT, so this total will be again net of VAT. Then we put VAT rate and calculated everything with VAT. So we did the same as we did for products. The only thing is that instead of creating a complex structure for each item, for one item we have just one line. If it's possible, if the nature of the data you have about the product allows you this, that would be the most optimal way of building information about costs or revenues. Now, the formula here consists of 3 parts. First, the link to our annual cost. Second is the link to this operating stage flag. Operating stage flag, we just created it in our sales block, in sales section. Operating stage flag means that we have operations in this period. We calculated it based just on the fact that we have sales or we don't have sales, and we presented it as a Boolean value, false or true. But in the formula, you can use it as a number, because actually false means 0 and true means 1 in Excel. So you can use it in a formula. And the last one is our inflation index. And we have a difference between sales forecast and expenses forecast. Look at our sales. In our sales forecast, here, for example, or maybe let's return to the same things here. So in our sales forecast, we have price and volume. And although volumes are 0 for the first 3 periods, our price accumulates inflation. So when the sales start, we always have the price with all the inflation for this year. But here in general expenses, we have just one line. If it's zero, that means it's zero. It doesn't accumulate anything. So we have to find a way to collect information about inflation for these 3 periods. It cannot be collected here. And that's why our inflation index here is the line 16, and it's price index to the beginning of the project. So now inflation is collected here. And you can see that when it starts in 2025, it starts not with 25 million, but with 27 million, and so on. So this is how we use this accumulated inflation index. Well, we need these blocks of information because of 2 things. First, in our financial reports, we usually present production expenses, administrative expenses, commercial expenses as 3 separate lines. They are not that important in our modern financial analysis, because this division into production, administrative, commercial was important for things like COGS, or cost of sales, or cost of goods sold. But in financial analysis today, we usually don't use this gross profit, that is revenue minus cost of sales. Instead, we usually use EBITDA, and EBITDA is sales minus production expenses, administrative expenses, and commercial expenses, but without depreciation. So this division into 3 parts, not that important, but it's still convenient to have them separated and presented separately. This is the first reason why we need blocks like this. Another possible reason is that sometimes those blocks of information will depend on different flags. Like, for example, operating stage flag can be like true, false for administrative expenses and production expenses, okay, but maybe commercial expenses will depend on something else. For example, they will depend on the index, on the flag that we created here, capacity utilization ratio. So we have like 50% of full commercial expenses in 2025 because we don't operate at full scale. We can use things like that. So we can create different rules for different items with different blocks in our financial model. And again, you can see that in the end, at the end of my model, I created 3 subtotals. And maybe you can even guess what kind of error I'm making here by this calculation. The formula here is simple. We don't use this sum if like here, because our many items are packed here in blocks. So later on, we will need just 3 subtotals from here. But I told you that I divided all my expenses into production, administrative, and commercial because I would like to present them in our income statement separately as 3 different lines. That means that from my income statement, I will have to link somewhere here, for example, to my production expenses. That's not good. We talked about that several times. I would like to have all the lines used by the other tables at the end of my table. So a good version of this subtotal would look like that. It's not expenses in the income statement. It's expenses net of VAT. Then I start with production expenses net of VAT. Oh, sorry. And so on. Administrative commercial expenses. And of course, the formula will be very primitive. This production expenses is just a link to this item. This is a link to this item, and now the link to this item. Yes. It looks maybe like unnecessary repetition. I linked it to the end of this table, then in my income statement, I will use again just simple link, but it makes my model much more readable, because I understand that from any table, from any report, all the links goes here to the end of this table. And if I want to know how this data is calculated, then all the answers are within this table. So I don't spend time to find a necessary block of information in my financial model. It's easier to navigate within the model like that. Okay. So now let's make a break until 8, and at 8 we'll continue. Oh, I see a question. I missed it. Is metals and mining hard for project? No, it can be hard for to get data for metals or mining. But if you have information like in this assumptions of my project, it won't be a problem. All the calculations will be the same. Okay, so let's make a break. Okay, let's go on.
Sorry, before we continue, can I ask you a question about the
Yeah.
project? For example, can I take, I don't know, imagine I want to open my own fitness center and I want to build a financial model for it. Will it be okay for the project?
Yes, yes. You have capital expenditure for initial setup of the center. You have, by the way, you can create your own complex model to forecast your revenue, because it's I'm not sure how the fitness center should be modeled, but it's based on first your customers who pays annually, and second, it depends on your training sessions that can be paid in addition to your membership. And you can create a model with all the drivers for this fitness center and so on. Yes, and you have variable expenses, like for those sessions, you pay something to your trainers, and you have general expenses for your fitness center and so on. Everything will be presented in this project, just like with any other projects.
Okay,
So
thank you.
It's okay. Okay, let's go back to our model. So after general expenses, another table, another block of information is our personnel. Our staff. Here we usually use something like people count and their salaries, average salary for a group of employees, or if you have a small project and you can list all your employees, you can actually list them with their actual salaries. And by the end of this table, we have total headcount, total salary, and then we calculate, here we calculated social insurance payments from this total salary. That means that we believe here that social insurance payments will be at the same rate for all our employees, which is in most projects the case. So we calculated social insurance and total salary expenses. This is what we'll use in our financial reports. So here we did everything correct. And you can see that we used Flex to collect information about our employees. And that means that if we want to add another, if we want to add another type of employee, we can just add it here, change the number of people, change their salary, and everything is already in our total numbers. Well, so that's a simple part. Now, all the projects, as I said, have very similar blocks of information: sales, variable expenses, or not variable expenses, raw materials and components, which is variable expenses in some physical units that can be a part of our inventory. general expenses, personnel, and now our investments. We invest in two types of assets. Current assets or working capital will be calculated based on some simplified rules. Fixed assets or capital expenditure will be calculated based on sums that we have for numbers that we have for those expenditure, this expenditure. Now, with working capital, the question about how we calculate our working capital isn't that simple. Imagine two types of businesses. First is this cement plant. For cement plant, I can say something like my raw materials and components, my stock is for 17 days of work. And then I can just calculate this expected inventory based on these 17 days. But what if my model is by months, not by years, and my project is some agricultural project, something like wheat or whatever? Can I say that my stock, especially not for raw materials, but for finished goods, that my finished goods have some stock for some days of work? No, it's seasonal, right? And I have inventory based on current months. So in this case, when I have seasonal business modeled not by years, but by quarters or by months, and also when my business have this turnover period longer than the calculation period, in cases like this, we cannot use this approach. We'll get just absolutely incorrect, crazy numbers. We will have to model our working capital directly by some formula that will be unique for each project. But for all other projects, and that's most of all businesses, when you have stable expected turnover period, and this turnover period is shorter than the calculation period, then our calculations for all our working capital items would be this way. Let's start with the most straightforward version, accounts receivable. Accounts receivable, we have accounts receivable if we sold something, delivered our product, and now we wait for payment. In this case, for 3 days. So on average, we wait 3 days until we get our payment. And that means that we can calculate our expected accounts receivable based on the following parameters. First, it's our sales. E39, it's total sales. Let's check it. It's revenue in the income statement. Okay. So the first parameter is our sales. Then we take this accounts receivable turnover period in days, and we divide it by 30 and by macro E4. Macro E4, let's look at this. is the planning step. So we actually calculated based on the length of this period in days. It's months times 30. That's how we calculate it. So it's very straightforward and easy for accounts receivable, because we understand that the amount of accounts receivable depend on sales. But now let's think about another thing, another parameter. Accounts payable. We have accounts payable when we got something from our suppliers, but still haven't paid, right? The same way as with accounts receivable. But in accounts receivable, the basic number is our revenue. In accounts payable, the basic number is our costs. So here, in this formula, we collected all cost lines from raw materials, from general expenses, to create this accounts payable. And this is not a law. We, although by general principles, it's absolutely correct, and we should always do it this way, yes, but sometimes we do it a bit differently. We put here again 39, just like it was with our accounts receivable. Why that? It's incorrect, right? But the problem is we don't know how these 5 days were calculated. And sometimes those parameters are all calculated as related to sales, just because it's easier to see how different items in working capital related to sales. So if these basic parameters were calculated based on sales, we would put sales here. If they were calculated on their own basis, which is total costs for this, just raw materials for raw material and component stock, for work in progress, it's again all costs. For finished goods, it's again all costs, and so on. So the only important thing here is to make sure that the basis for calculation of these days and the basis you apply here to translate these periods into the number was the same. Okay, now these items are current assets. This item is current liability. Net working capital is equal to our current assets minus current liability. And change in net working capital is equal to net working capital in the previous period and current net working capital, right? And look, this is another way how we use our technical column. I didn't want to change the formula from the first period to second period, because in the first period, I actually used just the number from this net working capital line. And then only from the second period, I actually refer to the previous net working capital. But I make this formula the same using the fact that for the first period, it captures 0 from this technical column. So that helps me in many cases avoid using different formulas in the first period in all the other periods, which is very bad style, by the way, to have two different formulas in one line. So that helps me a lot to make it easier. And change in net working capital is my investment, right? Because if I had no working capital in 2024, I have 76 million in 2025. The question is, where did I take this 76 million? I invested them. So this is how it works. We will see that in our cash flow. That's about working capital, right? And the last, by now at least, the last part of our assumptions is our fixed assets. Let's start with a very simple version. Imagine that we go into buy a land plot for this factory. If we have a land plot, we put it in a separate line, in a separate block, because land will be presented in our balance sheet separately from equipment or buildings and so on. And by the way, this is an important thing. In financial reports of actual companies, we usually see a line, fixed assets. And this is just one line, fixed assets, and that's it. But in financial reports or investment projects, or capital projects, we always try to present separately land, buildings, and equipment. That's important because this is not a real company. We model it all. And when we present equipment and buildings separately, we can see in the project that somewhere in the end of the project, we probably depreciate all the equipment we have in this project. And that means that actually the project becomes impossible because our equipment is too old. And with this quicker depreciation for equipment than for buildings, if we mix them in one line, we don't see these dynamics. And so we don't see our error. And what should we do with this depreciated equipment? After it depreciated, we probably have to invest some more in this equipment, buy something to replace old pieces of equipment. So that's important to present at least equipment and buildings separately. And for land, we can just create one more line if we have land purchase in the project. So for land, it's very simple. We have a line with land plot purchase. This is our payments. We have one item, but to make it in one style, we created like total payments for land, and then net book value is just like with net working capital. This is accumulated information about payments. We don't have VAT for land. We don't depreciate land. So if we paid it, we have it on our balance sheet until the end of the project. But for the next part, it's much more complex. So the first principle is just like with general expenses. You could do it another way. I did it this way here. And by the way, for your project, I don't expect that the principle you use for each table, for each block, will be exactly the same as mine. And even more, I expect that you will change that. You can choose from versions I presented, or you can add your ideas to how to model your assumptions. But just if you copy my assumptions sheet, change the numbers, and then link it to financial reports. And by the way of the course, of course, this link will be ready as well. Then I will have a big question about what you did in this project. So I expect some creative approach to your assumptions and to all your model. Okay, so we start with a simple list. Now, for capital expenditure, you can see that we typed all numbers directly to our periods, to our cash flow, and that means a very important thing for us. That means that this part of our cash flow does not depend on the inflation. That's a problem, because what if the inflation will change some of our costs by 2024, and we actually pay not 150 million here, for example, but more. So we have actually for this information for capital expenditure, we have two possible styles. First is this one. Second is to have total cost for each item. And then here we put just percentage. Something like this. 150 million here and 100% spent here. And then, of course, total payments will be not the sum, but another function called sum product. Of this and this. And this part we fix, just columns. Something like this. If I remove this part, this is how it works. If it's 50 and so on. And now when we did it this way, we have an option to add inflation here. So for the first period, it will be without inflation. For other periods, it will be with inflation. If we have something like 300 million here and 100% of that paid here, then we see that actually we paid not 300 million, but 305. Why did I do it this way instead of this way? Actually, there's no one answer. What way of modeling is better for our capital expenditure? Right, this way. If we have just preliminary forecast of our costs, and this forecast was based on some expectations and current prices, then this way will be the best, because inflation does exist. Inflation will change our payments. But in many cases, we start building a model, especially a detailed model for our project, after we prepared our capex part, and sometimes we even contracted it. So these numbers are not some forecasted value. They are not the result of a research. They are result of a contract. And if they are result of a contract, that means that they will not inflate unless inflation is a clause in the contract, right? So in most cases for investment projects, the capital expenditure part is fixed because those numbers come from a contract. That's why I did it this way. So we have no inflation in this part of our model. Well, now we calculated our totals, and we start doing the same as with our revenue or costs. Calculate VAT. Now we can add this VAT to have investments with VAT, but with our capital expenditure, it's actually a bit more complicated because we don't recognize our capex as costs, right? Instead, we put them on our balance sheet and we depreciate them. And even more, sometimes we have several periods of investments before we put it on our balance sheet and start depreciating, right? And until this moment, until we finished this investment, it would be good to present it, on our balance sheet as investments in progress to show that no depreciation start so far. So in this model, I created several lines for each this block of investment. First, when do I recognize these investments as fixed asset? So this is the period when all our investments go from investments in progress to fixed assets. This is this period. Now, I calculate investments in progress. Here it's very simple. If current, this macro E5 is the number of current period. I told you that sometimes we use it in our formulas. If current period is less than the moment when it goes to fixed assets, then we accumulate all our payments. After that, we just remove all data from our investments in progress. For gross book value, we start, if the moment is before we recognized our assets, then it's 0. If it's after, then we collect all that was in investments in progress. We take the number from gross book value so that in the next periods, we will keep this fixed asset, and plus additional payments if some payments happened in the period. You should be careful with this formula because this formula based on the idea that actually there's no payment somewhere here. If any payment appears here, it can calculate something with depreciation or whatever incorrect. Because formulas in this depreciation part of fixed assets, they sometimes are very complex because many different things can happen. Okay, so we have now our gross book value. we need this gross book value so that we could calculate depreciation. Because depreciation, we usually use linear depreciation, and linear depreciation is based on gross book value. We cannot use accumulated net book value, which is presented in our balance sheet, because in this case, our depreciation would be smaller each year, and it would be incorrect. It's not linear depreciation. So for buildings, we use like 20, 30 years, sometimes 50 years of depreciation. So depreciation is small, and it's calculated as gross value divided by depreciation period, and we take into account the period length, just in case it's not 12 months. And we use minimum of this, and another part is accumulated depreciation and gross book value. Just to make it correct, when depreciation is something like this, if it's 4 years, then after year 5, it must be 0, or we would have net book value 0 as well. So, or negative net book value, and it's impossible. So after we depreciated everything, we stop calculating our depreciation. Okay, this is the way we calculate it for capital expenditure. So the principle here, it's like in general expenses. Here we have a special capex part. For equipment, it would be absolutely the same. The only difference usually is depreciation term. For equipment, it can be between 5 and 15 years, usually depends on type of your equipment. For buildings, it's more between 20 and 50 years, something like this. We can create a separate line for other startup costs, for things that are not equipment and not buildings. And look, for things like that, it's especially easy to see from this line. Administrative expenses. Wait, we had administrative expenses. We had it here. It was a separate block in our general expenses. So why did we put it here to capital expenditure instead of presenting these numbers in our general expenses? That's why. Because during the investment phase of our project, I would like to see clean 0 income statement, because when we don't have sales, we don't have cost of sales, so we don't have expenses. That would what will happen in a real accounting. We don't have real accounting. We don't have accounting that detailed as in real life. So we have to do something with these numbers, because it's just unpleasant and inconvenient to see them at this stage. We have to do something to create empty income statement. And we do the following. We put them as a part of our capital expenditure. So we collect this data and then we depreciate them for something like 3 years or 2 years, maybe, or maybe 5 years. It depends on the nature of these items. But the idea that we collected all our startup costs in capital expenditure part, that's why we can actually rename this table and call it startup investments or something like this. because it's not just about fixed assets, it's about some startup expenses. And now we just as with general expenses, we have some our subtotals here, but we would like to collect all the information we use in our financial reports at the end of this table, so that from financial reports we link only the bottom lines of this table. This is the principle. So now we went through all items that constitute assumptions of the project. Again, sales, raw materials, maybe other variable expenses, general expenses, fixed expenses, working capital, personal working capital, and capex. That's it. Later in this model, we will add some other blocks. Those blocks will be equity, finance, and loans. Maybe if you have this in your project, you will add lease payments. But these are finance. We will not add finance sections to the project, to the model, until we have financial reports, because we will see the financing we need from our financial reports. And until that, we will not just work with those items. So this is what you need in your model and in your project. You can look at this example. I will copy this assumptions sheet to the folder right now, so you can see it. From this example, you can see what kind of data you need to collect for your project. It can be simpler, or you can make it even more detailed. It's your choice, but the list of these types of information will be the same. The last thing here, actually, this is not a part of assumptions. I will just announce this table, but we will discuss it within our financial report session next time. We will need to calculate taxes somewhere, and usually I choose a worksheet where to put all tax payments calculations. I put them on my project sheet. I calculate here property tax, VAT, we'll discuss that next time, and income tax. And that's because of this general approach I use in the model, where the input data and all intermediate calculations are gathered together, like here or in any other item. I have my input information, my parameters, and all the calculations. I prefer that because when I work this way, then working with these numbers, I immediately see what happens with all the calculations for this item, for this product. And if I make mistakes with my numbers, or if I made a mistake with my formulas here, I will see that immediately. So this is the way of modeling, the most convenient for those who develop the model. And that makes it easier to make your model correct, reliable, and stable. Another way that I showed you in the beginning of this lecture, when all parameters are in one place, and all calculations are in another place. It makes it easier for a user to work with the model if this model doesn't change. If you don't change this model every day or every week again and again. So for stable model, this style isn't the best. The best style is when you have all your assumptions on, probably on some assumptions sheet, and you can try doing that. And all calculations are somewhere else. But I personally don't like this approach because of complications created by this approach to any change in the structure of the model, in the list of products, because it's much harder to track your calculations, see your errors, and so on. So this is all for today. I looked at your spreadsheet with the list of your projects, and I saw that most of you chose something as a project. If you still have any problem with the project, if you have questions about how to choose a project, or maybe you didn't ask something during the lecture, you can ask now. So please feel free to make it orally. Don't need to type anything. And if not, then by the next lecture, I will move to financial reports. You can actually, as I said, you can actually look at all the lectures in your at your rate, at your time, because we have a copy of this lecture recorded. And the main thing is your projects. So by the next lecture, I expect to receive from you some drafts for your projects, maybe with some assumptions, maybe with some prepared infrastructure for the model, or maybe questions about the project. Yes, you can, Konstantin, you can ask now, you can ask by email. And by the way, I believe I mentioned that you all can ask by email about direct contact in Zoom. So until the last week of the course, because during the last week, I expect that many of you will have your questions. Some projects will start arriving, and I will not have time to discuss your projects. So, Konstantin, did you mention? Did you mean consultation now or later?
No, now.
Now, okay.
Can I ask in Russian?
What? Ask?
In Russian or English language?
If you're going to ask in Russian, then let's wait until the end of the lecture. Okay. So when everything that can be discussed in English will be finished, we'll just instead of switching off the translation, I will discuss your question. Okay. So any questions now? Okay. See you next Friday. Bye. Константин, ваш вопрос.
Здравствуйте. У меня возникла небольшая проблемка. Я искал проекты из различных компаний. И пока что нашел только проект, где не очень много информации. Это полюсы проект. И там есть информация, где существует размер инвестиций, и суть самого проекта. А данных никаких вроде балансов не существует. Это нормальная ситуация? Мне нужно самому это все делать?
Нет, подождите. Какой проект вы нашли, вы сказали?
Это компании Полюс.
Полюс в смысле золото, что ли?
Да.
Нет, ну очень маловероятно, что вы получите информацию о проекте там таком, как полюс золота, да?
Ну, то есть,
Ну, если вы там не работаете только в компании. И у вас, конечно, будет проблема, потому что, ну, откуда вы возьмете инвестиции, да? Откуда вы возьмете структуру затрат? Там, я не очень понимаю.
ну, то есть в металлургию лучше не лезть, я правильно понял?
Ну, это не металлургия, да? Или там какая-то переработка.
А,
Это горнодобывающий проект, правильно? Ну,
ну,
добыча
по сути,
золота.
да. Да, они золото добывают. И
Ну, да.
они на месторождении, как я понял, новый завод строят. То есть сам проект у них фигурировал в отчетности, но без раскрытия информации с подробностями.
А вы хотите именно золото, да, взять?
Ну, не обязательно золото, я просто думал в Metals and Mining посмотреть, но пока что те компании, которые я смотрю из Metals and Mining, не особо охотно делятся информацией.
Ну, это естественно. Ну, знаете, что я могу сделать? Если вам прям очень надо майнинг какой-нибудь, да, я вам могу, например, взять сейчас и кинуть бизнес-план какой-нибудь очень старый майнинга, да, без финмодели, но с описанием исходных данных. Если я сейчас найду, я вот сейчас смотрю, один момент.
М.
Вот какой-нибудь прям древний, причем даже возьму, знаете, может быть, если найду сейчас такое, пробую найти, чтобы он был не финансовый, а стратегический, может быть. Сейчас. Так, Норникель. Что Норникель? Нет, чего Норникель? Так, Северсталь. Так, это только маркетинг. Так, вот сейчас мы СУЭК посмотрим. Вот один момент. СУЭК. СУЭК. Ой, как-то это будет. Так. Модель. Так. Вот, знаете. Сейчас была же шахта СУЭК у меня.
Ну, а в целом, где обычно искать стоит такую информацию о проекте?
Это нигде не найдете.
Ну, то есть, если не Metals and Mining, то...
Если не Metals and Mining, да где угодно. Знаете, ну, в конце концов, вы можете прям взять, зайти в Google и набрать там коллекция бизнес-планов. Да?
Понятно.
Вот, открываем коллекцию бизнес-планов и берем из этого бизнес-плана описательную часть.
Угу.
Да? Где взять коллекцию бизнес-планов? Ну вот, например, вот вам коллекция бизнес-планов. Она древняя достаточно. Там какая-то, значит, это самое. Сейчас один момент. Это на моем сайте. Это вот там 15 лет назад я публиковал вот эти бизнес-планы.
Угу.
Вот вы можете взять, пожалуйста, любой бизнес-план. Там наверняка какие-то кривые левые модели старые, да. Не знаю, там в чем это рассчитано, но смысл в том, что в самих бизнес-планах есть описание.
Угу. То есть нам не обязательно брать актуальный.
Ну, если вы не можете найти актуальный, да, мы же сказали о том, что, в принципе, нас устраивает вариант с вами, если это выдуманный проект.
Угу.
Ну, а чем отличается выдуманный проект от старого проекта? В принципе, ну, вот как бы это проект, там цифры не настоящие.
Мгм.
Вот.
Понятно, спасибо.
Вот. Тут, кстати, может быть, даже и какой-нибудь майнинг есть. Там были такие какие-то экзотические товарищи. Это через конкурс делалось, и они присылали тогда проекты прям тяжеловесные. Ну или нет, сейчас не вижу. Ну, в общем, вот это один из примеров, как можно.
Пожалуйста, один вопрос. Я, возможно, неправильно понял. У нас задача какая? То есть мы должны сами придумать какое-то предприятие и для него построить, для этого предприятия, финансовую модель.
Не
То есть-
совсем верно. Вы должны поставить себе задачу проанализировать некий проект. В неком, ну, в каком-то недостижимом идеале это должен быть настоящий инвестиционный проект. Да? Но это абсолютно недостижимый идеал. Значит, мы откуда-то берем пример такого проекта. Значит, нужно выбрать себе для задачи, для этой, такой проект, по которому вы в состоянии найти исходные данные. Откуда это может быть? Это может быть проект, с которым вы встречались на работе. Ну, такая не всегда допустимая история. Во-первых, это меня будет немножко напрягать, потому что я буду сомневаться, а не входила ли в состав материалов там и готовая модель. Да? Вот. Во-вторых, это может быть не совсем корректно с точки зрения общения с вашей компанией. Да? Возможно, они не очень хотели, чтобы их проекты куда-то уходили. Но бывает, что это возможно. Да? Второй вариант. Это может быть проект, выдуманный может быть, да? Ну, то есть такого реально производства никто завтра не собирается запускать. Но построенный на полноценных, качественных данных, которые у вас есть, потому что вы знаете этот бизнес. Ну, то есть, как бы тот же проект с работы, да, условно говоря, или с предыдущих работ, но только не тот, который на самом деле делается, а какой-то такой же, да, такого же типа. Вот. Это может быть потому, что вам интересен этот бизнес, и вы изучаете это сейчас. Может быть, по другим курсам, ну, по другим дисциплинам здесь же, там, анализируете рынок там, или еще что-то. А может быть, вам просто кажется это интересным. Да? Либо это может быть просто такой бизнес, который достаточно понятен на уровне там, здравого смысла. Как вот, допустим, упомянутый сегодня фитнес-центр. Да? Что такое фитнес-центр? Все знают. Какие цены в фитнес-центрах? Все знают. Прикинуть, там, сколько денег уйдет на ремонт, ну, в общем, все могут. Сколько стоит аренда помещения? Ну, вот это все, как бы, все элементы такого проекта вы запросто можете просто из головы достаточно правильно назвать. Да? Вот это отличает его очень сильно от того, что сейчас упомянули, потому что когда вы золото добываете, вы ничего не можете узнать. Да? У вас там сложная там, математическая модель, которая определяет, как у вас разрабатывается котлован и сколько капексов. Там. У вас там про опексы, а откуда вы их узнаете. Да? Там, ну, этого нет. Это не лежит в открытом виде, доступное всем и каждому, просто потому что никому не нужно обычно. Вот.
Дмитрий Алексеевич, а тогда можно вопрос задать? Если мы
Да.
берем как бы construction, то можем мы взять, допустим, я просто там, то есть деревоперерабатывающее производство у меня было, но я сейчас понял, да, в процессе лекции, что, возможно, нет достоверных данных для, ну, то есть полностью процесс, чтобы выстроить. Возможно ли такой проект тогда, как какой-то жилищный комплекс,
Конечно.
закрытый, на котором есть еще, допустим, и ТРЦ для этих жителей? То есть…
Ради бога.
Да? Отлично.
Да.
Все тогда, спасибо.
Вот,
А
пожалуйста.
списки еще можно обновить? Ребята, вам еще не
Да,
отправляли?
конечно, конечно.
А вам просто
Могу
линк дали, да?
Что?
Вам просто линк дали на эти…
Мне просто линк дали, и я этот линк не прямо сейчас как бы у себя
всё.
зафиксирую. То есть я посмотрел, там он сейчас наполняется, ну, там, может быть, в понедельник я себе сделаю копию, и даже в понедельник это не значит, что все, как бы, пути назад нет. Ну, если вы передумали на ходу, там, сейчас начнете же данные подбирать, все начнут данные подбирать, и все обнаружат, что с какими-то данными там проблемы, и придется кому-то поменять тему. Ну, это всегда бывает.
Да, спасибо большое.
Да,
Могу
спасибо.
Могу я тоже задать быстрый вопрос касательно нашего проекта? То есть общая идея, то, что мы не делаем проект в какой-то большой действующей компании.
Да.
Вот, то есть это не проект инвестиционный от компании, это как стартап, то есть как начало, да, то есть это
Не
полностью
совсем
с нуля.
так. Не совсем так. Это может быть проект, который, ну, в реальной какой-то жизни, да, был бы реализован внутри компании. Но
Просто
это
если
должен
он
быть
внутри
проект,
компании,
достаточно изолированный от всей прочей деятельности компании, чтобы быть полноценным, завершенным инвестиционным проектом. То есть, чтобы его жизнь начиналась с его инвестиций, жила в сфере его доходов и окупался он своими результатами.
да, понял, спасибо, в этом и был вопрос. То есть, чтобы не внедрять его в общий баланс, а выделить как
Совершенно
бы...
верно.
Все, спасибо.
Можно еще к своему вопросу немножко добавлю?
Да.
Вот такая ситуация с недоступностью данных, она обычно распространяется именно на какие-то конкретные отрасли, или это в целом для крупных корпоратов не свойственно делиться подобными данными?
Ну, во-первых, это зависит всегда от того, какие данные вы хотите получить. Вот, скажем, ну, делиться просто так, да, ни для кого ничем не свойственно. То есть, в принципе, как бы не делятся, да. Но есть вещи, ну, например, если у вас бизнес B2C или у вас бизнес монопродуктовый, то вы неизбежно раскрываете информацию о цене, да. Ну, потому что вы продаете продукт по определенной цене, и вот она раскрыта, да. И это уже довольно много. А если у вас, например, бизнес проектный, то вы никому не раскрываете информацию о ценообразовании. По той простой причине, что ее, в общем, и нет, этой информации о ценообразовании. Вот у вас от проекта к проекту вся картинка меняется. Да? Вот. То есть, вот, допустим, там, мы строим финансовую модель, там, я не знаю, что у нас там недавно было, там, ну, условно, там, финансовая модель этого Синары в части производства подвижного состава. И все дико просто. Ну, вы продаете локомотивы, локомотив имеет цену, да, и, значит, эта цена умножается на количество. Можно ли не раскрыть количество, которое вы продаете? Да нет, нельзя, потому что у вас покупатель один, РЖД. Сколько РЖД закупает локомотивов, РЖД рассказывает. То есть вы живете в достаточно открытых условиях. Ну, структура затрат ваша, конечно, она не раскрывается, с одной стороны. С другой стороны, если вы компания открытая, ну, в смысле публичная, то вы публикуете финансовые отчетности, там вы про структуру затрат расскажете. Вот вы уже, в принципе, практически все рассказали о себе, да? Ну, капекс у вас тоже из отчетности видно. То есть, в принципе, вот самое основное вы рассказали. Вот. А может быть по-другому, там, вот сейчас там другая вот компания у нас, там, которая занимается тем, что, ну, основной ее бизнес – это поставки нефтяных насосов для скважин. И нет никакого понятия цены, потому что насос можно продать, можно сдать в аренду, можно оказать услуги по обслуживанию насоса, можно не оказывать. На каждую скважину его можно продать в своей комплектации, ну и так далее. Соответственно, у вас, наверное, не будет никакой информации об этой компании, которая позволила бы что-то смоделировать. Ну вот разница. То есть определяется очень многое природой бизнеса. Вот, скажем, золото, да, ну, золотодобывающий проект. Сколько там будет потрачено на разработку месторождения? Да черт его знает. Это знают сами компании, да, знают только, когда они сделают мат-модель.
Я боюсь, это вообще была единственная, по-моему, информация, которую опубликовали. Это именно сколько потратить на разработку. То есть
Ну, это они...
там не разработка месторождения, там, по-моему, перерабатывающий завод они строят.
Ну завод это попроще немножко, да.
Мгм.
Вот. Ну, как бы, ну, что можно сделать? Я могу вам, конечно, дать, допустим, этот самый, чтобы подальше как бы клиент был от нас физически. Вот. Могу дать вам там, проект РДНета, например. Это монгольская компания, которая там занимается, ну, в первую очередь, они медь добывают, ну и еще там понемножку. Вот. Но я боюсь, что вам будет трудно. Ну, то есть, если вы хотите именно вот погрузиться в эту тему, да, разобраться с ней, ради бога, я вам данные, ну, как бы описание проекта я вам дам. Вот. Но, ну, вот вам надо решиться сначала тогда.
Хорошо, спасибо.
Вот.
Да.
То есть подумайте, и если вы скажете, да, я это хочу, то я вам дам старый бизнес-план без финмодели, и на его основе вы будете с этим добром разбираться. Но это может быть вот болезненно.
Хорошо.
Вот, кстати, сейчас вот секундочку я посмотрю. А вот да, вот проблема, что с Суэком у меня даже есть обогатительная фабрика, но нету, по-моему, так, чтобы... Хотя нет, есть. Я могу вам дать презентацию 2005 года по обогатительной фабрике угольной. Можете попробовать от нее отталкиваться. Но сразу вам говорю просто, если вы берете эту задачу, значит, если так, вы на подготовку модели должны себе отвести, ну, где-нибудь, так, часов 20-30 в общей сложности на работу, да, то если вы пойдете от этого, то, ну, закладывайте сразу часов 30-40. Примерно так.
Понятно. Ну, я посмотрю.
В общем, подумайте, надо ли вам это.
Хорошо, спасибо.
Угу. Все.
Дмитрий Алексеевич, а можно вопрос? Вы же
Да.
занимались в своей жизни оценкой недвижимости?
Ну да, да.
А,
Ну,
можете
мы обычно недвижимость мы не оцениваем, то есть мы вообще не оцениваем недвижимость. Бывает, что мы оцениваем бизнес, там внутри есть недвижимость, ну, приходится ее тоже оценить.
Ну да, ну то есть если, допустим, как бы оценить именно отдельно как бы по частям, да, то есть отдельно, допустим, какие-то ТРЦ, мы обычно берем НОИ, да, я вот на сайте у вас видел, делим на капрейт. Вот, и я как раз хотел узнать, у нас вот это вот капрейт, она является ли разницей между требуемой доходностью и инфляцией, то есть как по формуле Гордона? То есть ной как формула Гордона, ной 1, да, в первом
Да.
периоде, то есть плюс 1, деленное на требуемую доходность минус инфляция. Также мы капрейт рассчитываем для оценки? Или мы инфляцию каким-то другим образом должны...
Да нет, это вообще вранье все, то, что на сайте написано. Ну, не вранье, это как бы чистая правда, но это вам не годится. Знаете почему? Потому что это вот так недвижимость оценивают, когда вот у вас стоит бизнес-центр, вот он уже стоит там несколько лет, да, все сдано, все помещения уже сданы, и платят вам арендаторы, и вот у вас чистый операционный доход получается от этого бизнес-центра, например, там 50 миллионов рублей в год. Там, вот все уже стабильно, да? И тогда вы на это смотрите, а считать тут особо нечего уже. Вы смотрите на это и говорите, ну, знаете так, мне 15% надо дохода получать от вложения в такие вот истории, а инфляция 5%. Ну и тогда вот эти там 50 миллионов в год мы делим, значит, на 15% минус 5% инфляции, которая будет годовой рост давать. И это значит, что этот бизнес-центр стоит 500 миллионов. Вот как бы все, процедура оценки закончена. И все вычисления закончены. Да? Но совсем другая будет ситуация, если вы этот бизнес-центр только строите, его еще вообще нету. Да? Значит, вы его будете пару лет строить. Потом вы будете его сдавать. Сдавая его, вы начнете, значит, мучиться, потому что сначала вы никому не нужны с этим бизнес-центром. Вам надо как-то арендаторов набрать. Чтобы набрать арендаторов, вы будете заключать какие-нибудь хитрые договора с переменной ставкой. Она, допустим, там первый год-два она пойдет ниже рынка, потом она пойдет выше рынка. Вот. Арендаторы не сразу все займут, ну, постепенно, да. А при этом финансирование вот этой всей истории, оно у вас кредитом, да? Ну, его много там, он не весь, конечно, но его много. Вот. Но этого кредита каждый год разное количество. То есть у вас сначала его много, там, допустим, 80% цены вы закрыли кредитом. И только остальное – это ваш собственный капитал, на который вы 15% хотели. Потом у вас кредита все меньше и меньше. Вот. То есть смесь капитала переменная, денежные потоки переменные. Все это растянулось на несколько лет. Никакого понятия нои у вас нет. Соответственно, эта схема не работает. Вот этот подход, там взяли нои, поделили на капитализацию, это только вот для очень-очень примитивного случая, когда речь идет о том, что это уже работающий бизнес с установившимися доходами. Все стабильно. Единственное, что будет их менять, это инфляция. Давайте ее в знаменателе вычтем. Вот в такую игру не сыграть в инвестиционном проекте. Почему для любого инвестиционного проекта и нужна полноценная модель? Вам надо построить полноценную модель, в ней сформировать свободный денежный поток, который у инвестора есть, его продисконтировать с той самой ставкой дисконтирования, там 15%, допустим. И тот NPV, который вы получите, он и будет вашей оценкой. В конце там останется хвост, это да. Вот вы сделаете, допустим, проект там, на 5 лет, на 10 лет модель. Ну, здание-то стоит, оно дальше функционирует. Вот в конце, вот в последний момент в своей модели вы действительно терминальную стоимость можете оценить вот ровно по той формуле, которую сейчас мы обсудили. Да, там в конце кредит выплатили, сказали, дальше нам модель не нужна, а здание стоит, его надо оценить. Ну, взяли, наконец, нои, разделили на ставку капитализации, вот получили конечную стоимость. И включили ее в общие денежные потоки. В принципе, вот так.
Спасибо большое.
А вот у меня как раз, вот вы сейчас обсуждали, появился тоже вопрос по поводу ставки дисконтирования. Нам как? Нам можно ее просто там самому придумать? Или
абсолютно,
там...
да.
Ага,
и я вам не подскажу. Вот как бы некая реальная задача. Да? Вот у вас какой-то реальный проект. Будет очень полезно просто посидеть над ним немножко, ну, там, посмотреть на него и подумать, какая ставка вам нужна в этом проекте. У каждого будет своя история.
Окей.
Все? Все, тогда до следующей пятницы.
Спасибо, до свидания.
Спасибо.
Спасибо, да, до свидания.
Спасибо большое.
Спасибо, до свидания.